Hey guys, it's Candace.
And it's Elena.
And you're listening to Cousins on Crime. We're back. Guess who's back?
Hey.
Back.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting us have the week off last week. I was gallivanting at the most magical place on earth, kidless. So
All the
that was
pictures
great.
that you posted, really made me think I was there with you.
Yeah, I wish you would have been there with me.
So.
It was so fun. It's amazing how much you can do without without dragging kids around the park. So,
True.
It felt a lot like the olden days when I lived there. So it was awesome. But it's not awesome. Murder.
Murder, yeah.
Yeah, the story I have for you tonight, I alluded to it in our last episode. It's somewhat of a double feature. There is more than one murder. And we're just going to jump right into it.
Feet first.
Yeah. The first victim I want to talk about is Amy Hoffman. Amy was born October 21st, 1964 in Korea. And then she was adopted by Florence and Frank Hoffman when she was 5 years old. And they lived in New Jersey. She was a very vibrant child, and she grew into a very lively and responsible young woman. By age 18, she was a senior at Parsippany High School in Morris Plains, New Jersey. She was a cheerleader, like you. She was very popular and loved by her peers. She had lots of friends, and her close friends said they felt more like sisters than friends.
Aww.
Her friend Dina said that she was a friend to everyone, and that even though she was a minority, she was Korean American, she never had any hang-ups about that. No one treated her differently, and she didn't seem to have any insecurities about being a Korean American among a heavily white population.
Right, she was confident in who she was.
Absolutely. She also had a boyfriend. He was a guy on the football team named Alex. He was her first love. Aw, young love.
Yeah.
And his friends said after he met Amy, he was a completely different person. He'd really only lose his temper on the football field, and he was like a gentle giant because of her. He really loved her. She had an after-school job at the Morris County Mall in Hanover Township at a place called the Surprise Store. The Surprise Store. I don't know. It's actually a clothing store, or it was a clothing store, but it sounds like a toy store to me.
Yeah.
So she really was your all-American high school student. She was well-rounded. She had it all. On November 23rd, 1982, Amy had cheerleading practice in the afternoon, and once it was over, she changed into her clothes. Her friends say she was very fashionable, so it was boots and, a sweater and all sorts. And then she went to the mall to work her evening shift. There is no report to suggest that her shift that night was unique in any way. Seems like everything went normal. When her shift was over, she walked out to her car, and Elena, I'm going to send you a photo really quick, actually.
Okay.
So you can visualize the parking lot.
All right.
Okay, I just text you.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so if you look at the second picture, I'm going to try and describe this for the listeners. I'm also going to post these pictures on our Instagram so that you guys can see it. There was no security, and it was really isolated.
Yeah.
The parking lot where she would park was actually lower than the main road.
Oh.
To get to the parking spot, you had to drive down a ramp and almost do kind of like a U-turn into the parking lot, if that makes sense. And the parking lot was about 30 to 40 feet below the main road. So it was quite isolated. especially at night.
Right.
And it was the perfect setting for what would happen next. Amy didn't return from work that night. And of course, her mother was very worried. Amy was responsible. She wouldn't just go anywhere else after her shift without notifying her mother or asking for permission. Plus, Amy was really excited to get home that night because her mom was going to give her a perm.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that precious?
My kind of girl.
I know. So her mom knew she was not going to miss their plans, and around 10:30, she drove up to the mall and found her car in the parking lot with no sign of Amy, and she immediately called police. The keys were in the ignition, and Amy's purse was inside with her wallet. Everything was in there, and her jacket, they were all sitting in her front seat. So it didn't seem like a robbery gone wrong or anything like that.
Right.
It must have been so eerie for her mother to find her car that way.
Absolutely.
Just like frozen in time like that. That just sends chills down my spine. We hear in a lot of cases that police wait 24 to 48 hours before a parent can officially report their teen missing, but not this time. The police didn't waste any time beginning their search for Amy.
Good.
Officer William Plate arrived on scene with his canine Baron to see if he could track her scent. And he was able to track her scent from her car to 2 spaces over from her car.
Oh.
And then the scent was gone. So they knew she had been taken.
Right.
With not too much to go on at the scene, police wanted to know, what was Amy up to in the days leading up to her disappearance? Was she into anything weird that her family didn't know about, Or did she recently come across someone that may have fixated on her and followed her maybe? So they conducted countless interviews with friends, family, fellow students to piece together her movements in the days leading up to her disappearance. On Sunday, November 21st, Amy slept in till about 10:30, and then a little afternoon, her friend Karen Speak came over to pick her up to go to their other friend's house. They had plans to go over there, hang out with friends, watch a football game on the TV, and hang out. Nothing wild or out of the ordinary. Very typical teen behavior.
Right.
When the game was over, they all went to Rainbow Lake's firehouse where a big spaghetti dinner was made for the football players and cheerleaders from her high school.
Fun.
And also while they were there, her friend Karen had some sort of medical emergency that actually sent her to the hospital. I can't find any details as to what that emergency was, but Amy went to the hospital with Karen and Karen's mother and stayed there for about an hour and a half while Karen was being treated. Now, the details on how she got back to Karen's house are a little fuzzy, but she went back to Karen's house, and then one of her other classmates drove her home around 11 p.m. But that was it for her for that night. She went home, she went to bed, she was in for the evening. Now, the next day, Monday, November 22nd, was a school day. But Amy stayed home because she had menstrual cramps.
Aww.
And all I have to say is, I feel you there, Amy.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
She spent that day just chilling at home with her mom. They were chatting, laying around, watching TV together. And then later that evening, she was feeling better. They went over to a family friend's house to visit, and they had dinner with them. Now, the day after, on Tuesday, November 23rd, this would be the last day that Amy would see her friends and family. She didn't feel well still. So she decided, I'm going to sleep in the morning, see if I can feel better, and then make it to school later. And she did. She felt better when she woke up, and she made it to school just in time to eat lunch with her friend Karen, who also seemed to be feeling better from whatever happened a couple nights before that. Now, Amy accompanied Karen to a dentist appointment during the day. and then they returned to school about 2:30. I think maybe public schools were a bit more relaxed in the 80s.
Apparently.
Especially for seniors. I mean, I don't know if it was unusual for Amy to be able to leave school in the afternoon and come back. We'll have to ask our moms if they were able to do stuff like that as seniors. But they made it back to school because they had cheerleading practice that afternoon. And about 4:45, cheerleading practice had wrapped up. Amy hustled to freshen up and change so she could rush off to her mall shift. And another friend whose locker was right next to Amy's remembered that she was wearing purple undies, a brown purple sweater, a plaid skirt, cowboy boots, and she just, like I said earlier, she was fashionable. She was all dressed up, ready to go to her shift, and she left the school about 5 p.m. to head to the mall. Now, Christine Gonzalez was interviewed. She was an employee at the partner store where Amy worked and said she arrived a little after 5 p.m. So I guess it was really close, like her school and the mall.
Okay, so she did arrive because that was my question.
Yeah, she did arrive there. The store she worked at was the surprise store for women. And then Christine worked next door at the surprise store for men. So it was kind of like, I guess you could imagine it as American Eagle and Aerie. Like they're connected, but they're two different stores.
Yeah, okay.
Christine said that Amy took a break around 8 p.m., like her quote-unquote lunch break. You know how that works. And this was verified by another mall employee that remembered seeing Amy eating French fries at around 8:15. Christine ended up coming over to the women's store to help Amy close up around 9:20 p.m. And then the girls went back over to the men's store to close up at that shop too. So the two walked out the back together around 9:35. And as they approached the mall exit, Christine stayed behind to wait for her ride. She didn't have a car there, and she needed to wait for someone to come pick her up. So Amy headed out to the empty parking lot towards her car. When I worked at Wet Seal in the mall back in the day, we had to park at like a certain area in the car park.
Right.
And we all had to walk out together. So
Very
it seems
smart.
like they were doing the same thing, but they kind of parted ways when they felt like they were safe. Like, oh, okay, she's walking to her car. I'm going to stay here.
Right.
Anyhow, finding this information was when police would get their first big break in the case. A suspicious man was seen driving around the mall parking lot by a group of girls who had congregated after their shift at the mall. And one of those girls was named Barbara Horwath. I hope I'm saying that right. She was the same girl who saw Amy eating French fries on her break. So they kind of, working in the mall, you kind of get to know other people from like the kiosks and other stores and stuff like that.
Right.
So Barbara knew Amy, and after work, Barbara and her friends were all kind of congregated there after the mall had closed. Well, Barbara said she saw a greenish-blue car driving around, which she thought looked a lot like a Chevy because her sister also had a Chevy. It had particular headlights that she kind of recognized. So the car had what she described as putty marks on the driver's side, and she got a pretty good look at the driver too. He had dark eyes, light-colored curly hair, and a very prominent pointy nose.
Oh.
So the group of girls ended up finishing their conversation. They all dispersed towards their car, and as Barbara got into her car and drove out of the parking lot, she noticed Amy walking to her car.
Oh, man.
So this was just after Christine and Amy parted ways.
Right.
So you've got two last sightings of her. Well, it wouldn't take long for them to find her. 2 days after Amy went missing on Thanksgiving Day, her body was found by a couple walking their dog. It was floating in a retention tank in a very remote area in Mendham Reservoir in Randolph Township, about 12 miles from the mall.
Oh, my
Now,
goodness.
this area was known as Old Mendham Waterworks, and it was made up of these large cement holding tanks. And I'm going to post pictures of the actual police photos. I had to take stills from Investigation Discovery's documentary on this because I couldn't find hardly anything
Right.
evidence in the case. So anyway, they're going to look a little bit like I took a picture on my computer. But that's where I got them. And when I say this area was remote, it was surrounded by woods on 3 sides. Okay, and to get to these tanks, you had to take a dirt road to get out there. And in fact, it was locally known as sort of a lover's lane, if you will.
Okay, that's why this couple
really
was walking there and
walking their dog.
uh-huh.
So, the initial thought is that whoever dumped her out there must have been a local, someone who knew the area.
Right.
Because you don't just happen upon this place.
Right, okay.
Amy was found in the same clothes that she was last seen in. They found significant evidence at the scene to suggest that a struggle took place there, and that she was still alive or recently alive at the time she was dumped. Like she was still bleeding at the crime scene.
Wow.
So they believed she was probably attacked there. There was blood on the side of the tank, one of the tanks that she was found in. Blood pooled on the ground, and Amy's ring was actually found on the ground nearby, so they knew a struggle had ensued. Additionally, there was a blood trail from the pool of blood to the tank she was found in. So presumably she was attacked there, like on the ground, and then drug.
Mm-hmm.
An autopsy was performed on her body by the assistant medical examiner, Dr. Frederick Roddy. He located a long gash on the left side of her head, a wound on her right shoulder that was like L-shaped, and what he referred to, and she had what he referred to as short injuries at the base of her neck. I'm not sure what exactly that means. Perhaps they were short stabs and not fully, the knife didn't fully go all the way in. I'm not sure. And that actually, something just clicked in my head. That might come back later, and I'll explain. Her left ear had been severed, and she had a laceration under her nose, and finally, the 2 chest wounds that likely killed her. One penetrated 4 inches, and the other more than 7 inches through her lung and to her back between her 9th and 10th ribs. So, stomach contents revealed that she'd recently eaten. They found chicken and French fries. And from that information, he was able to estimate time of death, which he believed to be 4 to 6 hours after her last meal, which we know she consumed on her break around 8:15.
Right.
I'm always amazed when they can tell stomach contents.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's crazy? It's like, surely it's all mushed up in there. How can you tell it's chicken and fries? You know what I mean?
Well, depending on how well they chewed the food and...
Yeah, I mean, like corn. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they had corn. Yeah, duh. But I just think it's wild. Like,
yeah.
But anyway, trigger warning here. It was also determined that Amy had been sexually assaulted. But the ultimate cause of death they did believe to be that 7-inch stab wound to her chest. So she did bleed to death from that. Now, based on reported sightings of the suspicious car and person driving around the parking lot that night, the guy with the pointy nose, police were able to come up with a composite sketch. And this sketch was circulated, and police had their eyes peeled for anyone even remotely resembling the sketch. So they kind of had information about the car. Now they have this sketch.
Well, thank goodness for observant people like Barbara.
Exactly. Can you imagine? Well, I think, we have intuitions, and something just didn't feel right to her about that.
Yeah.
It just didn't look right. And so she paid attention. And I
I love
I'm
that.
always on high alert. Like when I see something that doesn't look right, I'm like, okay, the guy had a gray shirt. He had khaki pants. I'm always trying to take in all the information I can when something
Yeah.
doesn't feel right. So good on her.
Yeah.
But the sketch was circulated through the police department, and one Morris County patrol officer took notice. He ended up stopping a guy named James Koedatich.
Say that again.
Koedatich.
Koedatich.
Who was also, he had blonde curly hair. He had a very prominent nose. He had the facial hair. But the man wasn't detained, and he was free to go. I don't have any more information about this particular encounter, other than I guess the officer was confident enough this wasn't their guy, so he let him go. But he looked a lot like the sketch. Police were making progress in the investigation, though, because other witnesses came forward.
Oh, okay.
A man named Timothy O'Grady said he was visiting his girlfriend's mother at her house off Morris Turnpike, which is very near the reservoir. Now, his girlfriend was away at college, so I guess he was just checking on her mom. That's really sweet, by the way.
Yeah.
But he remembered leaving at 10:15 p.m. because he wanted to get home in time to call his girlfriend, who was off to college. So he wanted to get home before it got too late to call her, so he knew what time he left. And he said he had to drive past that dirt road I mentioned earlier, the one that led to the retention tanks. And as he approached that road, a car was coming towards him from the direction of the reservoir.
Oh,
And he ended up pausing to let this car pass. And he recalled that the car had its high beams on.
Oh.
Which is always annoying when people do that. So that's another memorable occurrence. He also told police that he was very familiar with cars, and he was certain that the car was a 1970 Chevy two-door.
Interesting.
He didn't say which model, but he knew for sure it was a Chevy. 1970. It had like specific mounted headlights, like I said. It was 2 headlights side by side on each side. So that's how he knew.
Oh, okay.
He said there was only one person in the car, and he believed that driver to be male, but it was really dark and it was a rural area. So he wasn't for sure. Now, Amy's friends and fellow cheerleader, Laurel Ivy, said that she and much of the school were very shaken up over Amy's murder. They weren't sure if high school girls were being targeted or cheerleaders or what. Like, they didn't know. There had apparently been some suspicious phone calls on the payphone located in the hallway where the cheerleaders practiced after school.
Okay.
This person who was calling, like, knew their names.
Oh.
And so he would ask for such and such. And then when they would get on the phone, he would ask weird questions. And it just made them feel like they were being watched.
Yeah.
They didn't know if this person went to school with them or if was just horsing around. And actually, at one point, there were questions raised about the assistant football coach, Kevin Sheehan, but nothing ultimately came of that. There was no connection. The reason they looked at him was because apparently he'd watched the cheerleaders practice and he was very friendly with them. You know, I don't know if that's proximity or if he was just looking and liking, but it kind of made some of them uncomfortable, and the source material didn't say anything nefarious was involved there, so they moved on from that. Her boyfriend and her friends were questioned as well, and no one could even comprehend who might have done this to her.
Right.
She was beloved, you know, and we talked about this before, Lena. What is scarier, the fact that something could happen to you by some random person or by somebody you know?
Right.
So her fellow classmates were very afraid for their own safety. And that fear would skyrocket when another area woman was attacked.
Oh, my gosh.
On December 5th, 1982, just 12 days after Amy's murder, a trucker was parked in Alamuchee Township, New Jersey. He was asleep in his cab at a rest stop on Interstate 80. He was startled awake when around 4 a.m. he heard banging on his door,
Oh my
on the door of his
gosh.
truck. And as he opened the door, a frantic woman covered in blood told him that she'd been stabbed, and she begged for his help.
Oh my Lord.
I can't even imagine waking up to that.
No.
So he rushed to her aid. She continued speaking to him. She said, "I know I'm going to die."
Oh,
So she just kept telling him things about her attacker.
wow.
She was trying to describe him as much as she could because she felt like she was dying. Her attacker was tall and skinny. He had bushy hair, facial hair, and the trucker immediately called out for help on his CB radio,
Oh my
and police
gosh.
were called to the scene. Sadly, the woman was pronounced dead at 5:10 a.m. when she
No.
arrived at Hackettstown Community Hospital.
How strong was
she
she to get
I know.
help? Oh my goodness.
She was later identified as 25-year-old Deirdre O'Brien. Deirdre was born August 29th, 1957, literally the day after my dad. Isn't that weird? In Mendham Township, New York, to parents James and Georgia O'Brien. She had 3 siblings, James, Maureen, and Aaron. She graduated from Seton Hall University with a degree in art history, and she really wanted to be a museum curator or work in like an art gallery. She
How
was
cool.
very artsy-fartsy.
Aw.
Yeah. Her father said that she herself was a very talented artist, and he actually still had all her paintings hanging in their family home.
Oh.
She was working as a waitress at the time of her murder, and almost immediately, Sergeant Thomas Gallagher with the state police came out and told the public they didn't have anything to worry about, and they didn't believe there was any link between Amy's murder and Deirdre's murder. They said, "We're treating them as separate cases." I hate when police do this. Like, I can't understand any benefit coming out of saying that these cases are not associated. By saying that,
No.
you're like, okay, public, you don't
Don't
have
be
one
on high
killer to
alert.
worry about. You have 2.
Well, true.
You know what I mean? Like, by saying that, you're suggesting that there are 2 murderers out there. So
Oh my gosh.
maybe it was better to not say anything so early on.
Right.
Also, the community wasn't so sure that the 2 cases weren't related to each other. Deirdre worked just over a mile from where Amy worked. The 2 were young, beautiful women, and they were both abducted from their car. So it kind of seemed like they were related. Deirdre's car looked like it had been forced off the road. The headlights were still on. Her car door was open. Her purse was on the front seat, a lot like Amy's car was found. Police believed that she was forced off the road and taken at knife point from her car, driven 25 miles northwest to that rest stop on I-80, and there she was taken into a wooded area nearby where she was stabbed several times in the chest. And maybe she played dead, or maybe her attacker heard something because he just left her there.
Oh.
I don't know why he left her for dead. I mean, maybe he thought she was dead.
True.
But that's when she got up and ran into the parking lot of that rest stop and stumbled to that door and had the strength to beat on that door and wake up that trucker.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Since Deirdre was a little older and wasn't in school anymore, her movements weren't as precise as they found Amy's to be.
Oh, okay.
But the morning of her murder, Deirdre was driving to her parents' house after her shift at the Library Restaurant where she was a waitress. Now, not much is reported about the days leading up to her death, so it seems like they were kind of stumped with this one. But something was about to happen that was going to send this case down a very weird path. On the night of January 16th, 1983, An officer responded to 44 Harrison Street in Morristown, where he found a guy at his home hunched over the kitchen table with his shirt rolled up, and his mommy was tending to the wounds on his back.
Okay.
The man told officers that he was driving down Route 24, and he was pulled over by what he believed to be a police officer. It had flashing blue lights, so he pulled over. And when the driver got out of the vehicle and approached the driver's side window, he just started stabbing him. So, the man was taken from his home to the hospital with a police escort. They took his clothing and secured his vehicle to check for evidence to try and catch whoever did this. Because now they're like, okay, someone else is being stabbed. Like, what's going on here? But there was something else that was causing urgency. The similarities in Amy's and Deirdre's cases was starting to puzzle investigators.
Okay.
Now, the following day, they combed through the car of this man who'd been stabbed for clues. A detective, John Kennecom, crouched down next to the car and came face to face with the car's tire, and it looked very familiar to him. The tread, I mean. He'd seen that pattern before. It looked very much like the tire impression recovered from near Deidre O'Brien's abandoned car. So, he stood up and backed away from the car to scan it from front to back. He was looking at a 1970 Chevrolet.
Okay, that was my question.
This car was now of particular interest to them, and they knew they now needed a search warrant.
Okay, so how did they get to this guy's house? That he called 911?
The police were called to the home.
Okay.
Either his mom called or he called. I think his mother called.
Okay.
I didn't find that in the source material. I just read the reports from the officer that responded. So now they were going from looking at the car for clues to find his attacker, and now they need a search warrant because they know they're about to start collecting evidence.
Right.
So things had changed in an instant because the man recovering from the stabbing in the hospital was none other than James Koedatich.
The man that they had, that they let go.
The man that matched the composite sketch of the suspicious man driving through the parking lot that was pulled over by the police and let go. Remember that?
Yes, I do remember that.
Well, they did get a search warrant. They took his car to the state police lab in Little Falls for further examination, and they went over it with a fine-tooth comb. And they found exactly what they were looking for.
Oh, do tell.
It was enough for an indictment, and James was arrested for Deirdre's murder on January 19th, 1983. Then, later that year, on December 15th, 1983, he was finally charged for Amy's murder. So I guess it took them a while to find evidence linking both murders to him. And I'll go through some of the evidence they had. Okay. Jury selection for the trial began on September 24th, 1984. And after a couple motions from the defense to change venue and suppress evidence were denied, they got on with things. They actually motioned for change of venue multiple times, and it was denied every time. A jury of 7 men and 5 women were selected, and the trial began October 9th. Now, the state laid out the case, providing evidence of Amy's movements that day, you know, everything I talked about earlier. They really wanted to prove that she didn't have sex with anyone earlier in that day, which was necessary for the sexual assault component of the crime. Because, of course, the defense is going to argue that she had consensual sex with someone at some point. Now, the prosecution also provided the jury with forensic evidence because Amy had fibers and foam on her clothes and boots that were a very close match to the fibers and foam found in James's car.
Oh.
Additionally, similar polyester fibers from Amy's skirt were found in his car. So we have a huge link there. They also put Dr. Isidore Mialikis on the stand, who was a forensic pathologist with expertise in stab wounds, and he testified that the defendant's stab wounds were self-inflicted. So there was evidence of
Self-inflicted.
like hesitation, and the wounds were very close together and shallow. And when I said something clicked in my head earlier
Yeah.
about the short injuries on Amy's body,
Yeah.
they kind of match up with this. Very short, shallow injuries. So he
Like
was
he-
trying to make
like
it
he
look like he
wasn't-
was attacked.
Right. Okay.
I'm starting to get Alec Murdaugh vibes from him as well.
Aye.
He's committed crime and he's now,
Playing victim.
exact. Now the defense said couldn't have been Mr. Koedatich. He was at home playing video games. So
Right. In his
Yeah.
mama's basement.
yeah, he was busy playing Atari or whatever games were out at that time. Mrs. Pac-Man. They also called a bunch of family members to the stand to testify that they saw James with a full beard during the time of Amy's abduction and murder. So that doesn't fit the description of the man seen at the mall, which
No, I'm not buying it.
the sketch did have facial hair, but they're saying he had like a Father Christmas beard.
No.
So I don't know. Now, 2 weeks of trial came and went. The jury was handed the case on October 25th. They deliberated for only 12 hours and returned a verdict of guilty for the murder of Amy Hoffman.
Wow.
And he was also found guilty of kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault, unlawful possession of a weapon, and possession of a weapon for unlawful purposes, which seems like the same thing, but I guess it's not. He was also found guilty of Deirdre's murder, and he was sentenced to death in Amy's murder, but it was overturned in 1990 when the death penalty in New Jersey was deemed unconstitutional.
Oh.
But it was commuted to a life sentence, so... But he got 30 years for Deirdre's murder. I don't know why I guess it makes no difference because of he's going to die in prison, but...
So were they tried at the same time with the same jury?
I think so. I think they were. I only read reports of one trial
Oh, okay.
and the outcomes, so I
Gotcha.
just assume. But I have more to say about James Koedatich, unfortunately.
Okay, let's hear it.
Would you believe me if I said that he'd killed before?
I would believe you, yeah.
Well, when he lived in Dade County, Florida, before these murders, he murdered his roommate, 40-year-old Robert Anderson. And James served, wait for it, 11 years and was granted parole in, wait for it, 1982, the year he murdered Amy and Deirdre.
Guys.
So, how did he end up in New Jersey if he was paroled in Florida?
He wanted to start a new life.
Well, guess what, Lena? They allowed him to move out of state. He said, "Can I move out of state?" And they said, "Okay."
Sure. Go do what you want to do.
What?
No.
Ridiculous. That is ridiculous. So he moved to Morristown, New Jersey, just 2 months before he murdered Amy.
And his mom lived there?
2 months. Yeah.
Apparently.
Apparently, she lived there. Yeah. So he was moving there to live with her.
I am so mad right now.
I mean, how many times do we talk about someone who's out on parole, a violent offender, 11 years?
Yeah, I feel
Are
like
you
that's 90% of our cases is
Right.
they were paroled and they go to do what they want to do.
It just blows my mind. Blows my mind. Blows it.
Yeah.
He murdered again and again, and he would have done it again and again and again.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, at least maybe we should be thankful they found him.
Yeah. We are thankful for that. I just don't see why 2 more
Had to.
young women had to die.
No.
And these families, their lives were forever changed in 1982. There's no going back from that. And actually, Deirdre's family was approached in 1994 to be a part of a new center for abused children. James O'Brien was the president of a statewide coalition for crime victims. So it wasn't a reach to involve them in the opening of a new children's advocacy center. Jim helped to secure a house at 8 Court Street in Morristown that would serve as a refuge for the child crime victims, and it opened in April of 1996, and they called it Deirdre's House.
Oh,
Isn't that great?
sweet.
According to their website, Deirdre's House has helped over 32,000 child victims or abuse or neglect, and children who have been witness to a crime.
Wow.
If you want to learn more about that, it's just deirdreshouse.org, but I will post it in the show notes. And if you want to learn more about their cause or see how you can help, you can visit their website.
Yeah.
I love stories that end with a little bit of hope, you know?
Right. And I've said it before. I mean, I just love when people can take a tragedy and make it into something beautiful and something that benefits others instead of letting it break them down.
Yeah, it's tragic, and I don't know how people pick themselves up off the floor and go on, but I think if anything, you know, throwing yourself into a project like this is probably such a great coping strategy, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's all I have for this episode. Sad, but also with a little bit of glimmer of love.
Yes. Well, thank you for telling us of the life of Amy and Deidre. They sounded like very sweet little ladies.
You know, it's always the good ones.
You're right.
Always the good ones.
That's why I try not to be good. Ha ha ha.
I know. Lena, you better watch your back, because you're one of the good ones. Oh, Lord. Well, this was great. Let's do it again sometime.
We will.
We'll be back with a new episode next week.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye, guys.
Well, thank you for listening to Cousins on Crime. If you're enjoying our podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating so that other true crime fans can find us.
If you have any case suggestions or just want to say hey, email us at cousinsoncrime@gmail.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, where we post case photos and information at Cousins on Crime Podcast.